Welcome gamers. If you're watching this video, you probably know some things about speedrunning already, and maybe you've even tried it for yourself. Today I want to show you how to go from picking up a new game to reaching your speedrun goals with minimal time and effort. Speedrunning is all about learning to optimize so you can do more with less. When you hit your goals, you examine everything you've learned so far up to this point and then re-optimize so you can go even faster. As you repeat this process, you learn to spend your time targeting the specific areas that need the most attention so you can get the biggest improvement for your effort. There's more to it as you get into more advanced levels, but for now I just want to focus on how to learn as efficiently as possible. Today I'm going to explain how I got a time of 41 minutes in The Legend of Zelda with only 15 hours of total time invested, as well as some additional grinding tips that may help you on your own speedrun quest. In speedrun learning, access to information is everything, so let's start with everything I know about The Legend of Zelda so far. So to start with, basically the only things I know about this game is the world record is around 27 minutes. It heavily features this interesting screen scroll glitch. There's a block clipping glitch. Both of these, I'm told, are not as hard as they look. And there's a really interesting looking wrong warping trick. Aside from that, the obvious, it's a top-down adventure game with a 2D grid of tiles. So since we know next to nothing about this game starting out, going to the speedrun.com page is pretty much always going to be the best place to find information about a game that you want to speedrun. And you can learn quite a lot just from the information that's on the leaderboards. So starting out, we've got 404 total runs. And up here at the top, a couple 27s. We've got less than 10% of the entire field of submissions being sub 30. And that's a pretty significant number in this community. So looking at about the halfway point of the leaderboards, we can see that most people that run this game are able to get a sub 40. And it has been my experience in the past running The Legend of Zelda: A Link to the Past. Most of the people I know that have taken a break from that game to play Legend of Zelda have typically been able to get a sub 40 pretty quickly. And here at the back end of the leaderboard, you can see that more than 90% of the people that have played this game have gotten a sub 50. So that should be a very realistic first goal going into this. And then it kind of trails off and gets less dense as you go down. And these are just some pretty casual runs at this point. And by looking at the leaderboards in this way, you can get a pretty good idea of what a typical speedrun journey for this game is going to look like. Here's a good example, a speedrun friend of mine, Concision, who was learning the game at the same time as me. And there's a lot of valuable information to be had when you click on these runs as well, because the vast majority of runs on speedrun.com are going to have videos. So not only can you actually watch the run at the skill level that you have in mind, you can see all sorts of stats on their live split as well. So you can see here that Concision had a time of 1 hour and 3 minutes after attempting the speedrun 9 times and completing it once. And then when he starts up the 10th attempt here, he gets his second completed run, which ends up being a time of 49:07. So that's a pretty significant jump already. The first step for us is just going to be to have a specific goal in mind. So for this particular project, I want to spend up to 2 weeks learning the game and doing speedruns. And I want to spend no more than 20 to 30 hours doing that learning. And I think a time of about 45 minutes is reasonable for a first target. Again, looking at speedruns around the target range, at 46 minutes, you've got 44 attempts and 3 completed runs. And with a short game like this, you can easily do that in under 10 hours. Here you've got under 45 minutes with 9 attempts and 5 completed runs. And a low 44. He doesn't show his completed run count, but only 22 attempts. Pretty similar stats here as well with a mid 42. So right away going into this, it looks like if we make good use of our resources in under 2 weeks, I should be able to come up with something in the 40 to 45 minute range. And having this particular goal in mind that we're trying to achieve is super important because it's actually going to affect everything about the way we approach practice going forward. And to help explain that, take a look at these guys at the top of the leaderboard here. These guys had a very particular plan that they had to execute to achieve their target time of sub 28 minutes. But it's not so different for the guys at the bottom of the leaderboard here. These guys had an idea, and they had to put a plan together and execute that plan in order to achieve their goal, which for some of them was simply post a time under 1 hour. But it still holds true for all of them that the particular goal you have in mind is going to set the tone for how you practice for it. Say, for example, you're learning the speedrun for a marathon that you're doing in 2 weeks. It's pretty casual. All you have to be able to do is take some notes down and play through the game. You're probably going to be comfortable with doing it in 1 hour, and you're not going to practice any difficult tech or get to a level where you're doing anything with any sort of consistency aside from I know the way from dungeon to dungeon and the general path of the game. By setting the bar at 45 minutes to begin with, I'm setting the expectation that as I'm learning the game, I will be able to replicate everything that I see in a run of this caliber before I move on to learning the next section, which completely changes my approach to everything that I'm going to do in the learning phase going forward. Now that I have a general idea of what I'm hoping to achieve, I can go over to the Guides and Resources tab, and if you're playing a more popular game like I am, the Legend of Zelda speedrun community has been around for a long time, so there's plenty of good guides and resources to look at, and the most important ones are usually going to be hosted on speedrun.com. So knowing essentially nothing about this game, the first thing that they have for you to look at is beginner routes, and this seems like a really good place to start. So we make our way over to Order of the Eight. It is a Legend of Zelda learning website. And starting out at the top of the list, we have beginner routes. So we'll just check out the first blue ring route. In my limited exposure to this game, I know going into this that the blue ring is an optional upgrade that improves your defense, which is good for beginners. And they even have a companion video guide to go with this tutorial. Convenient maps of the dungeons that explain what to do in every room, and a brief explanation of what to do on the overworld in between dungeons as well. Now at this point, if your goal was just to do a couple speedruns of the game and come in at under 1 hour or under 50 minutes, you could just read directly from this website, do what it says, and you would be able to achieve a time like that no problem. But for this particular example, I want to go a little bit more into depth with the guides and resources and show you what all is available and look at everything before making a decision. So I'm going to start with clicking on this full video guide for the blue ring route. And here you can see Jay Coper has got a 36-minute time in this game, and he's doing a 47-minute video that essentially is going to teach you how to get a sub 45 on The Legend of Zelda. So it's literally just a very quick and dirty walk and talk. He's going to do it and explain it as he's doing it. And this 47-minute video is going to contain everything that you need to get a sub 45 in The Legend of Zelda. So we'll get back to this because this is exactly the type of content that I'm looking for, because I want to get to sub 45 as quickly as possible. Looking back in the guides tab, they have a set of splits for live split that you can download that has the beginner route all set up. And here there's a link to Red Candle, which if you do a deep dive into Red Candle, you can see that there's a whole lot of technical details about glitches and manipulations, item drops, and informational graphics. Stuff like small interactions and weird corner cases. We mostly want to stay away from things that are advanced, so we're pretty much not going to use any of this. Even though this is a great resource for people that are looking to become advanced at the game. But since that's not us, we will continue on. We're not doing second quest, so we'll take a look at this tutorial playlist by JSR. So we've got a number of interesting things here. We've got a 2 first blue ring beginners tutorial, and if we go back to Order of the Eight, you can see that we are indeed doing level 2 first. But as you can see, this is a much more in-depth tutorial at well over 3 hours. So if you had a longer timeline, like say you wanted to spend at least a month or two going in depth on the ins and outs of how The Legend of Zelda works, this would definitely be the tutorial to start with. We've also got a screen scroll tutorial for beginners. I'm not sure if this is going to be useful yet, so just put that idea on hold for now, and we can always come back to it if it ends up being useful. But for now, it looks like for my particular needs, the best resource available is the 47-minute tutorial for sub 45. And if I want to go more in depth with this game at a later point, then I can always come back and watch the longer tutorial and get more information from that. And from there, you can go up the levels of difficulty, and there's a tutorial for people that have already ran 2 first to learn how to do the 3 first route. Going over to the resources section, you'll see the buffet practice hack. This brings up a really important discussion about what platform you're playing on. You can play on Switch if you'd like, and that'll give you access to the rewind feature, so you can kind of practice the same room over and over. The best way to practice the game is going to be on console with an EverDrive, so you can load the buffet practice hack, because as you can see here, the practice hack is going to give you access to all of these menus, tell you how long you've been on the screen, and all sorts of various other information. The most important feature by far of playing on a practice hack is the ability to save and load states. So that way you can practice specific sections of the game until you're satisfied with it in specific configurations. And what this means in a practical sense is I can do stuff like warp directly to level 4. And I can choose things like how much health I have, or if I have no ring or the blue ring equipped, and then make a save state at the beginning of the dungeon that I have the ability to reload at a later time if I want to try again. Emulation is also a really great solution if you're playing an older game like I am too. So each emulator file can save and load 10 different save states. And in this game, that's perfect because there's 9 dungeons. You can make a save state at the beginning of each one. Or if you're playing a longer game, you can go into even greater detail and make multiple copies of the ROM file and have as many save states as you want. A newer and or less popular game like Skyward Sword HD, for example, that came out in 2021, will have far fewer speedruns typically, about 10% of the Legend of Zelda speedruns, and much less guides and resources. For the resources, we have some splits files here. For the guides, we have an any percent video guide that is a work in progress as of yet. And if we follow the links to the YouTube playlist, you can see that we've got a series of 2 to 5 minute videos that covers approximately the first 10% of the speedrun, plus a few key glitches that help you finish the game. And pretty much the advice that you're given at this point is, I've covered the basics here. If you're looking for more, go watch a speedrun. And that's fine, it is what it is, but just keep in mind, if you run into a game like this, you're going to have to do a lot more work yourself to figure things out. You can also see here on the Zelda speedruns page for Skyward Sword HD, one of the bigger sequence breaks in the game is simply a 30-second video of them just demonstrating how it works once with no commentary. And again, you can figure it out with just this information, but you're going to have to do a lot more of the work on your own if this is the case. So going back to speedrun.com, just about any speedrun community is going to have a Discord server that's linked on their speedrun.com page. Even if it's not a very popular speedrun, there's almost always going to be a few diehards in the Discord server that check the server every single day. And this is why it's particularly important to get into these communities and post your progress and ask any questions that you have, so you can meet the people that play this game and learn what they know. So here you see Concision posted his first PB a couple days before mine, and Rooslugs already jumps in with, I can get you to sub 35 in no time. And you can see that Dr. Blue has already been helping with watching Concision stream, helping on calls. So this is a very active and generous community that really thinks you can push to sub 35 pretty quickly and wants to help you get there. So that being said, super important, post in the Discord, post your progress, ask questions, tell them you're streaming. A lot of Discord servers will have a PB brag section where you can find active runners to follow. And another good tip is the speedrun.com page will show recent runs where you can find people that are playing the game right now. And for a lot of games, you can also follow the Twitch directory and see who's playing the game right now. For Zelda games and a lot of older games, you're going to find a lot of randomizers, but occasionally you'll find somebody that's really good that's speedrunning the game. One other thing that's really important to be aware of is some categories will go through many iterations, and Ocarina of Time Defeat Ganon is one in particular that's been through at least 6 or 7 different route changes over the last 12 years or so. So this is a run that's got over 1,000 runs on the leaderboard. And you can see here we've got times around 10 minutes where they're playing on GameCube. A couple years ago, they were playing on Wii Virtual Console. And 10 years ago, they were playing on the Chinese IQ player, all for different reasons and various routing purposes. So this is yet another reason why it's a good idea to engage directly with the speedrunning community, so you can find a run that's recent and appropriate for your skill level. So now that I have a pretty good idea of where I want to start, I'm going to go back to Jay Coper's Blue Ring guide for sub 45, and I'm going to use that in combination with the companion tutorial with maps from Order of the Eight, so I can just read along the steps as I go along and have a visual reference for what I'm going to be doing as I go through each of these rooms. It's important to note at this point that the way I'm actually going to be playing the video game in the beginning stages is very simply, where do I go on this screen? And I just mean in very simple terms, starting out on this screen, I want to go in this door. That's it. That's all I care about. In this room, I just want to get the sword. In this room, I just want to exit the top side of the screen. That's all I care about. We're just looking to do really simple top-level stuff at this point. The only thing I'm interested in is, where is Dungeon 2, and how do I get there without taking damage? Now, we can look a little bit more in-depth at the movement, and this is something that you'll eventually get into as you just walk around and get a feel for the game, but you'll see that it is a grid system. It's a grid of tiles, 1 tile, 2 tiles, 3 tiles, and so on. And Link's movement is a little bit wonky, and if you pay very close attention, you'll see that if you get slightly past one of the grid intersections and start tapping the opposite direction, you can get Link to do some weird things. Like here, if you tap down, he'll sort of nudge around this corner. That's some really advanced stuff that is useful to know at some point how it works, but I'm not at a level yet where I need to understand all the deep mechanics of it. I just need to walk Link over to the side of the screen and scroll it. It's a little more obvious when you get into these dungeons and you can see the exact grid of tiles laid out, but it's the same concept that applies even on the overworld. And you can see that if I go just a little bit past this tile here and press to the right, Link is forced to walk downwards to align with the grid before I can turn. And this is a really fundamental concept to this game that we're going to revisit later. Following along with this very on-the-fly tutorial, though, we're just going to take notice of anything interesting that happens. Like here, he mentions if you transition the screen at this exact spot, then you can just walk straight across without dealing with any of these enemies. Things like that are very simple to learn and practice, and we can incorporate that into our movement right away. He's not going to spell out every specific little thing, though, so it's important to look for context clues and sort of mimic his movement the best we're able to, and try to understand the basic idea of what he's doing. we know he's not a super advanced speedrunner of this game, so most of the things that he does should be fairly achievable for a beginner to replicate, especially because he's doing easier strategies specifically so it's not hard to imitate. So here we're just kind of look at this group of enemies and look to simply walk around them without dealing with them at all. And similar thing here. So when we get into this more, this guy will become more relevant, but I noticed right away that he's not looking to engage in combat with anything. He's just waiting out their pattern and looking to find a safe route around and through. And then finally we arrive safely at level 2. So at this point, I can take this small chunk of gameplay that I've seen up to this point and just practice following the path. I'm gonna go this way. Don't know what to expect really. I'm just gonna try to follow the path the best I can. Remember, I want to be here when I transition the screen, and we'll just hold right, and it works. We're gonna do like before, watch their patterns, just to go safely around them. And here, we're gonna block this arrow, and look at what these guys are doing, and just find a spot to go safely around them. Didn't get through safely that time, but I tried, and that's what matters. And then we arrive in relative safety also at level 2. Now at this point I'm going into a new section of the game, so I want to stop, reload at the start of what I started learning, and then do it over again a few times to reinforce muscle memory and figure out how to do it without taking any damage, because I want to make another save state at the beginning of level 2 so I can practice it from full health. So in order to do that, I'm going to need to be able to get through this level 2 overworld without taking any damage. And that's probably going to take several tries. So going through this myself, I would spend probably 10 minutes or so just practicing this level 2 walk over and over until I feel like I've got it. Once I'm pretty confident that I've got it, I'm going to make a save state right here. And I'm going to go back to the beginner tutorial. And essentially, I'm going to do the same thing. Just go screen by screen, observe, and try to figure out what's going on in each room. And I've got this convenient little graphic to go back to so I can easily see I need to kill the enemies for a key here, here, and here. I need to kill these enemies, and so on. And then I'm just going to do attempts of level 2 for as many times as it takes to reinforce muscle memory and ensure that I can do it quickly and without dying before I'm ready to move on. I want to point out a few notable concepts as we go through this dungeon that are going to give you an idea of what sort of things that I'm looking for as far as analyzing strategy and game mechanics as they come up. So going into this room is our first actual combat of the game, and the thing that I noticed right away is when he steps on a tile that is in line with these enemies, they immediately start running towards him. And that's going to save you time. If they're coming to you, you don't have to walk all the way to them. I notice right away here that he appears to be going out of his way to collect money. So the notable thing about that is you have to kind of think of everything as a resource. It costs you time to go and get that money. So you're trading time for something that you perceive to be more valuable than the time it took you to get it. And as of yet, he hasn't explained what the money is for. So we just have an idea vaguely that we want to be collecting as much money as possible at this point. A couple notable things in this room right away. This middle enemy right here when you kill him, the rest of the enemies in the room die. So we're going to try to track that guy down right away. And it's immediately apparent that sword beams are super useful here. When you have full health in this game, if you use the sword, it fires a beam across the room, and you can do some level of damage to an enemy that's not close to you. So it becomes immediately apparent that health management is going to be super critical to this run. Here we've got a situation where killing every enemy in this room causes a pack of bombs to drop. And then we immediately use those bombs to blow up the boss of this dungeon and collect the heart container. And he explains as he walks sort of how he was able to stun lock the boss and get a quick kill. So that's something that I can go back and practice and make sure that I'm able to do all of those things in a row and get a few relatively clean runs before I feel confident about moving on. Now we're going to do the overworld section for the next dungeon, which happens to be level 1. And just skimming through the VOD here, you can see that this is quite a long overworld section compared to the first. And as it turns out, it's quite dangerous and very easy to die. So this is a section that I would give a lot more attention to, because especially in this game, the rules of the category dictate that you should avoid dying as often as possible, and especially in any place where dying and being sent back to the start would be advantageous for speed, which is something that can in fact happen after you get the sword. If you get killed by the enemy outside, it's faster. So that's something you have to be very aware of. This is one of the harder sections of the game for a beginner, and dying is essentially against the rules of the category. So this is an area where I'm going to make a note that I'm probably going to have to focus a lot of my attention on getting this path down solid without dying. This here is a really good example of things that you'll commonly see in tutorials where you can do it, but it may not necessarily save that much time, and it may be more dangerous than it's worth. What he's going to do is come around through this spawning enemy right here. And if you just walk on this half tile, you can get through right as he spawns. But if you mess up your movement at all, you're going to take damage and lose time. And as a beginner, I think it's much more important to take the extra half second to let him spawn in and kill him, rather than risking taking damage because your movement isn't perfect. So it's one of those things that I would definitely try it a few times to get a feel for it, but I'm probably not going to do that movement starting out. The number one thing to remember with these small time saves is consistency is speed. If you can't do it fast every time, it's not fast. At this point going into level 1, it's going to be just more of the same, figuring out what he's doing, roughly how it works, and working on it to the point where I'm pretty confident that I can replicate it for the whole segment that I'm practicing without any assistance. So for day 1 of speedrun learning, I got through level 1, did the relatively short walk to level 3, and kind of learned the path through level 3, but not quite well enough to feel super confident with it yet. And that's good enough for day 1. I can come back and revisit all of those things on the next day. So what I want to do here is come back and go over what I've practiced so far on the next day. And it's important that it's the next day, because you want to reinforce your muscle memory on multiple days. It's really important to recall the same information on separate occasions. because it reinforces that long-term memory and ensures that you'll be able to find the path when you go to start doing your actual speedrun attempts. So the first thing I want to do for day 2 is just get through all of the sections I've learned already, and anything that I particularly struggle with, kind of work on it for a second before I move on, just to reinforce it and make sure I'm not forgetting anything. And if it helps, I can even reference the tutorial video again if I forgot something critical. So one thing that's super useful about reviewing content that you've done after you learn later stuff is you'll notice that he resets this screen to manipulate the spawn and movement of this enemy here so that he doesn't have to fight him. And as I was doing my review of day 1 learning, at one point I accidentally came in really low on this screen, and the enemies on the screen started spawning in on the bottom right, and I thought, well, that's super convenient. If I do that, then I won't have to fight them. So I tested it a few times, and as it turns out, that's not really a consistent manipulation. As you can see, they still spawned in on the top right, but it's worth mentioning still that you should be looking to take concepts that you've learned in your game and figure out different places in the game where that same concept can apply. So as it turns out, this concept did end up coming up again almost immediately in my day 2 recap. I didn't notice at first in the tutorial video that he takes a path through the center of the room like this and just comes down to get the key from inside the center of the room. And one thing I realized coming down along this path is that you can beat this wallmaster to the key by only stepping half a tile onto it and then just be on your way. And it doesn't lose time at all. But after doing this for a little bit, I eventually came to realize that the reason he walks in the center of the room is the wallmaster only spawns when you're touching the wall, so if you just walk this path, you never have to worry about it at all. So, similar idea to manipulating the ways enemies spawn, and that's another example of one that does work. And just another thing to keep in mind as we're going through this, if you kind of pay attention to the skill level of his movement and how optimized it is, this section in particular right here, where he's dodging the Sora attack, is clearly losing a couple seconds on movement here, so we're not going to have to hold ourselves to an incredibly high standard to be able to replicate this and get the sub 45, which gives me a lot of confidence going forward that this is an appropriate tutorial for my skill level, and it's something that should really be achievable in not too much time. As we start getting into the middle section of the run here, you can see in level 3 that he goes out of his way to kill all of 3 of these enemies in a room where you otherwise wouldn't be required to kill anything to advance. And the reason for that is because another bomb pack spawns, and this is the second time we've seen this, so I'm starting to get the idea that bomb management is going to be really one of the key elements to this speedrun. And still keeping in the back of my mind that he's been doing a lot of rupee collection, and we really haven't seen what this is building up to in order to really be able to put together an idea of how I should manage my inventory while collecting these random drops. Now we're finally doing some of the shopping, and we can see that we need to have 250 rupees at this point in the run. And that's important because we can go back and look at all of the secret rupees that were picked up and kind of count backwards and figure out how many random drops do you need on the overworld, or is it possible to make up all of it by getting these rupee secrets? And this isn't explicitly spelled out in the tutorial, so I kind of have to go ahead and do a little bit of counting and figure out how many rupees do I need to have at every split in the speedrun so far. And if I don't have that many, where should I be looking to get them? And as we go on, we come to find out that really the same thing goes for bombs and keys as well. These 3 inventory items have very strict cutoffs at specific intervals in the run, and you have minimum requirements that you need to meet at every split. Otherwise, you need to start to look for backups. So as I'm progressing through learning this game, one of the things that I'm keeping track of is what's the minimum amount of inventory that I'm going to be able to have at every split. In fact, I've gone and went through the effort of writing into every split line all of the inventory that I need so I can quickly see when I split, do I have enough of all of these items or not as I'm going through the route. In fact, the very next thing I learn in the beginner tutorial is that there is a hard requirement of 2 bombs to get through this dungeon, as you can see in this section right here. But I know from the level 3 section of the tutorial, if you kill all 3 of the red dark nuts in this room, they will drop a bomb. And then counting backwards from there, I can see that it takes a minimum of 3 bombs to complete the rest of level 3. So going back to here, I know that at this point in the run, I need to have at least 1 bomb already to complete level 3, and then have enough bombs to complete level 4 as well. Otherwise, I'm going to need to farm bombs on the overworld. So by tracking this information, when I go back and do my level 3 practice, I can plan on already having at least 1 bomb at this point in the dungeon. And this little bit of research and item tracking, as it turns out, is a huge part of the beginner level optimization for this game. Because what happens is if you do not have any bombs in this section, then you have to exit the dungeon and go back to the overworld to farm for bombs, which is going to cost you at least a couple minutes minimum. I want to go back to something that I skipped over in the earlier stages of learning this speedrun. At this point, after you've done the first 4 levels, you have the option to pick up a heart container or a potion. And this decision is particularly important to me now because earlier you had the option to get a potion after completing levels 1 and 2, but you have to go quite far out of the way, and you have to farm a bunch of extra money in order to be able to make that happen. Up to this point, I've put in a lot of detailed practice in the earlier levels of the game, and I've determined that I'm pretty confident I can get through levels 3 and 4 without a potion. And this decision would effectively save me all of the effort of going into this cave and grabbing the letter from the old man, having to farm some additional rupees after level 1, then having to visit the potion shop and still have the chance of being short on rupees if I don't get pretty good RNG on the rupee drops. So just by determining that I'm probably not going to die in levels 3 and 4, I get to skip all of that entirely. Going into level 5, we have a couple interesting examples of deciding whether or not to do glitches. And entering level 5, you have to go up this screen 4 times in order to access level 5. But if you prefer instead, you can learn this screen scrolling glitch where you go to the screen that's directly to the right, and then you scroll over to this side of the screen and then walk to level 5. And it's going to save you about 20 seconds or so, with the condition that you have to spend all of the time learning the screen scroll glitch, and then you have to do it quickly enough that you don't lose the time that you would have saved by doing the different route anyway. So Jay Coper in the beginner tutorial is advising that for a sub 45, it's not worth it to go through all of the effort to learn the screen scroll glitch because the amount of time that you're likely to save just isn't worth the effort. And then almost immediately, a few rooms later, we get to the first blue dark nut room. And in this room, he's going to teach the block clip glitch, which allows you to just very quickly slash the sword once and walk through this block and go down the stairs. And the reason this is important is because we're not in a very good position to fight all of these blue dark nuts with only having the level 2 sword. From a beginner perspective, it's going to be much easier to just learn how to clip through this block really quickly by pressing 2 buttons at the same time, rather than having to fight all 5 of these guys in a tight space. These are already some of the most dangerous enemies in the game, and we're a little bit underpowered right now. So the time and health we save by learning this simple movement is going to be well worth it, even for somebody that's brand new to the game. So a few rooms later, we're going to come to a second Blue Darknut room, and we do have to fight these guys at this point for the first time. So pay attention to the guy that's in the center of the screen on the top, and he's going to turn to the right. And this is where that grid system that we talked about is really going to start coming into play in a big way, because these guys have to abide by the rules of the grid. And for that reason, if these Darknuts want to turn up or down when they're facing to the right like this, they have to align with a half tile or a full tile before they're able to make that turn. So you know that this Darknut is not going to turn up or down immediately. He's not able to. But because he's aligned horizontally, he has the ability to instantly face to the left at any time he chooses. And as you can see, he did a quick turn there and started walking the opposite direction. Now I have to approach these guys in a particular way because they're invulnerable from the front, and they do a lot of damage to me right now, and it's possible to die very quickly if I'm not super careful. So I definitely don't want to attack them from the front. I also want to try to avoid attacking them from the back because they can quick turn on me and I'm not able to get away in time. So what I want to do is mostly focus on attacking them from the side, and I'm able to do this thing where I attack and whip the sword in the opposite direction so that I can attack and start walking away at the same time. So by attacking them from the side in this way and then immediately running away, I have the greatest chance of dealing damage while avoiding being in danger myself. And that right there is a couple really good examples of exploiting known game mechanics to take advantage of one of their strengths and one of their weaknesses. Going through level 6, I want to point out something interesting that I came across, because I was actually able to sit in on one of Concision's learning streams where Dr. Blue was taking him through level 6 and teaching him some routing things and useful mechanics. And one of the things that came up was this safety strat, where some people like to pre-fire the sword at this section right here, because it's possible for a Wizrobe to spawn almost immediately out of the doorway, and it's not really possible to react fast enough. And this idea is what's known as a safety strat, where you're taking a very small time loss in order to do different movement that's going to give you a much higher success rate. If we contrast that with Jay Coper's tutorial, where he walks through this spawning Octorok, this is pretty much the exact opposite idea. This is an example of a very risky movement that has minimum potential for time save, but a high risk of losing time if your movement is not very, very good. So when I was learning the game at first and going over this section, I did try this a few times, and in my experience as a very, very beginner of this game, it's not really practical to stop at exactly this spot and make this left movement here on this bridge without getting hit, because I just don't have a good enough grasp of the movement mechanics to be able to hit that side of a window. So instead what I have to do is wait for these guys to spawn in, and then I can stab them and walk through. That's 2 seconds and 45 frames. As opposed to if I were to actually practice this movement and be able to do it, I would save 1/3 of a second by specifically practicing that more difficult movement and being able to do it consistently. This more or less is the same idea as a safety item, just on a smaller scale. You're giving up some chunk of time in exchange for greater consistency. So getting into the late game is where the difficulty is really going to scale up, and by this point I should still have 2 potions left for the rest of the game. And we have a couple of particularly notable choke points. Here, you need to have at least 2 bombs left after this section to finish the rest of the game. And here, if you go through the north door instead of bombing the west wall, the door will lock behind you and you'll be unable to get back without dying and resetting the dungeon. And because this dungeon is quite complicated, it's probably not going to be very practical to memorize the layout for a first playthrough. So I'm mostly going off of the map as I play the game here. It's going to be super important to me to be able to read the map as I'm progressing through this section and make sure I don't get lost or get ahead of it so I can go in the correct rooms and not lose myself potentially 2 or 3 minutes by going the wrong way. And this is basically how I've tackled the entire game up to this point. Just follow along with the map layouts as I'm going through my dungeon practices and making sure that I'm able to read all of the stuff in these rooms in real time as I'm progressing through the dungeon. Like I mentioned before, I have the live split layout in addition to that, where I'm going to be able to determine if I have the correct number of inventory when I'm done with the section. So I get used to practicing each dungeon with those two tools at the same time, and it's going to feel way more natural when I start to incorporate those sections into a live speedrun. And then once you've done all of your individual segment practices, you're fairly confident that you can put it all together. The only thing left to do is to do full game attempts of the run and see where things start to break down. Because, like this game in particular, all of the segments are dependent on what you've done in the previous segments. And if you miss anything important, you're going to come across dependencies that you hadn't accounted for, and it's going to kill the run. So the first attempts is going to be the kind of working out the kinks phase, where you're trying to determine that you're doing everything necessary to complete a full run from start to finish. One classic example is Trinex in A Link to the Past. Say you get to Trinex and you've forgotten to obtain the ice rod because it's a very isolated and far out of the way item. Super easy to forget. You get to this point in the game and don't have the ice rod, you're easily losing 5 minutes. And these are the type of things that will happen to you as you're putting your first runs together because you don't have solid muscle memory down for the whole route yet. So after about 5 hours or so of attempts, I was finally able to put together a run that was deathless that I was pretty happy with overall. Once you've gotten to the point where you have a run that you're satisfied with, then you can reevaluate your goals. Maybe, like I said, you were just going to do a marathon appearance, or you want to do randomizers with your friends, and you don't really need to learn any additional content about the game now that you've gotten this run that you're happy with. Or on the other hand, I actually want to continue learning Zelda 1, and I'm looking at getting a sub 35 now. So basically, it's the same process all over again. I'm going to go back to the leaderboard and start looking at runs in the sub 35 range and try to learn what these players are doing. And another thing that I'm doing as well is I'm talking with the guys in the Discord, and I've actually got a couple example runs to go off of. These are still considered intermediate level 2 first routes. This one drops the blue ring entirely, which accounts for half of your hit points in the run. This is also a very optimized version of a beginner route, but includes the blue ring safety and still has a couple minutes worth of room for error for a sub 35. And now that I've spent some time playing the game, I'm able to go through and look at this more optimized higher level route and follow along and try to pick out what this player is doing differently than what I was doing before, and try to emulate these strategies and movement. And you really do tend to progress in this iterative kind of way where you pay attention to smaller and smaller details. Like back at the very beginning of starting to learn, I didn't know which way to progress through the dungeon, and so I needed to look at maps that told me explicitly each room what I'm going to do. But at this point in my learning, I should have those steps memorized to the point where I don't need maps anymore, and I can use all of that mental capacity that I was focusing on reading maps to focus on smaller details of the game, because which way to go should be an automated process by now. I shouldn't have to think about that anymore. And instead, what you do is you free up a bit of mental real estate to start focusing on things like prize pack counting. So now I can figure out where the bomb drops are in these prize packs and figure out what counts that these specific enemies are going to drop those bombs on. Remember I said back at the start that one of the most important things in speedrunning is information, And the biggest difference between these guys at the top of the leaderboard and these guys at the bottom of the leaderboard is not necessarily what information they have access to. We all have access to the same information. It's about what information they're able to absorb and then use in the moment. So no matter what skill level you're practicing at, you're essentially looking at combating the forgetting curve. When you first do something and obtain this information for the first time, it's going to taper off over several days, and after a week, you've essentially completely forgotten it. But by learning it slowly at first, and then going back over it multiple times until you're sure that you have it memorized, and then repeating it on subsequent days, you're going to drastically flatten that forgetting curve and make sure that you're able to retain that information for later when you need to recall it and use it. And after a while, simple processes like which door to go in become automated, and you don't have to actively think about those things anymore, freeing up some mental real estate to focus on the more immediate problems like, how do I get this enemy to go where I want it to? Automating processes and muscle memory works really great to a certain point, up until it doesn't, and that's a different discussion for another day. But for now, the most important thing is you generally want to have a plan of attack when you go into a room and know what the expected outcome is, and then have done it enough times to be able to plan for the worst when things don't necessarily go the way you wanted them to. I need to mention here that as I'm progressing to this next goal at a higher skill level, I still want to be able to look at a run that's about that skill level and be able to do with relative consistency all of the things that they're doing. And since you're focusing on smaller and smaller details, it's going to get harder to practice up to that skill level. A lot of people like to just do speedruns of their game, but it's important to not shy away from practice and be patient with yourself and practice for as long as it takes for you to be able to do these movements with relative consistency. For example, learning the screen scroll glitch, I need to come over here and find an exact visual cue on the correct pixel and then press down for exactly 1 frame or 1/60th of a second. And if I've done that correctly, I can scroll to the opposite side of the screen. But there's a couple things that can go wrong here. I can accidentally go too far and not be able to make it back for the screen wrap. Or it can look like I set it up right, but I actually set it up incorrectly and I end up losing time by scrolling the screen in the wrong direction. Just don't forget to be patient with yourself as you're learning these harder tricks, and learn to embrace the difficulty and joy of the speedrun grind. So real quickly, just keep in mind, utilize all of the resources and community that you have available to you and practice with a specific goal in mind. And I tell everybody starting out speedrunning, it's a very small and tight-knit community, and these are some of the most passionate individuals that you'll ever meet, and they want to tell somebody the things that they know. So if you're passionate about the same game as them, they will gladly take the time and teach you everything that they know.
Practice. Practice. And if you haven't practiced, you should be practicing. So keep practicing. It's the only way you're gonna get better. It's the only way you're gonna be number one. Number one, anything. You practice.